Jon stood upon the battlements of Winterfell with his cloak wrapped tightly around him, the wind biting at his cheeks. The daylight was already beginning to wane, casting shadows across the courtyard below, where the snow crunched under the hurried footsteps of men and women preparing for another long night. Far in the distance, white hills rolled away in gentle undulations, every drift holding a secret that the north kept close to its frigid heart. Sometimes, in the silence of that unending winter, Jon thought he could feel the land breathing beneath its layers of ice. It reminded him that the north was ancient and full of mysteries, some of which he would perhaps never truly understand. He turned to gaze out past the ancient walls. Ever since the long night and the defeat of the White Walkers, he had felt both relief and a lingering unease. He had sacrificed much. All of them had. Though he no longer bore the title of king in the north, he carried the burden of leadership in his very bones. Time and again the same question needled him. Was all truly at peace now that the Night King was gone? It was too easy to think that nothing else lurked in the dark corners of the world. He had learned, too many times, that old legends held a seed of truth, and that new threats could sprout in places one never thought to look. Winterfell's wooden gates groaned, drawing his attention below. A small company rode in, their horses steaming in the chill. At the head was Tormund Giantsbane, the towering man with wild red hair. Jon watched as Tormund dismounted with a laugh that echoed in the courtyard. Snow scattered from his boots as he strode across the yard, exchanging words with the stable hands before beckoning to a rough sack tied to his horse's saddle. There was something about Tormund's expression, an excitement overshadowed by a trace of apprehension. Jon had known the wildling long enough to read the subtleties in that broad-bearded face. Something important had happened. Jon made his way down the steps, the cold stone seeping through the soles of his boots. The wind funneled between the towers of Winterfell, carrying the scent of pine and the distant tang of wolves. As he descended into the courtyard, Ghost, his white direwolf, fell into step beside him, silent as a wraith. Tormund's grin was a shock of white teeth against his ruddy complexion. "Jon Snow," he called, voice booming in the open air. "Thought you'd be up in your fancy chair waiting for us to bring you word from the far north." Jon offered a small smile, though he was never sure how much of Tormund's mocking banter was playful, and how much was genuine. "I prefer to meet my friends face to face." Tormund snorted and seized Jon's hand in a hearty greeting. The wildling's grip was so strong that Jon felt the bones of his wrist protest. "We've been ranging far beyond the wall," Tormund said, his tone quieter now, more serious. "And we've found something. Something you need to see for yourself." Jon's gaze flicked to the sack, hanging from the saddle. It was tied shut with heavy cord, but he noticed the care with which Tormund's men were unfastening it, laying it down gently on the snow, as if it were made of glass. "What is it?" Jon asked, voice low. Tormund's eyes gleamed in the dying sunlight. "A discovery," he said. "One I'm not entirely comfortable with. We found it in a hidden cavern at the base of a glacier. There were runes on the walls, ancient, older than any giant scrawl, older than anything the free folk remember. An end in the center of the cavern, resting on a pedestal of ice." Tormund's men pulled back the mouth of the sack. Jon stepped closer, breath hanging in the cold air, and then he saw it. An egg. The object was large, roughly the size of a man's head, but elongated and tapered at one end. Its surface shimmered with a dark, silvery hue, as though forged from starlight and black iron. The scales upon it were intricate, each one layered over the next like armor. Even half buried in the sack, it gave off a quiet, almost imperceptible heat that was wholly out of place in the bitter winter. Jon's heart thumped once, hard. He had seen dragon eggs before. Daenerys Targaryen had once shown him the ones that had belonged to her, though only 3 in all the world have been thought to exist in modern time. But this was impossible, or should have been. "How?" he breathed, eyes tracing the delicate ridges of the shell. Tormund shook his head. "You tell me, Snow. This is the stuff of old stories. And yet, here it is in the flesh." "Damnasend." Jon hesitated. The air seemed charged around the egg, stirring faint memories of old Targaryen lore. A swirl of confusion and awe took hold of him. He reached out but did not touch the egg, his hand hovering just above its surface. It radiated a gentle warmth. That warmth felt almost alive. "Bring it inside," he said softly. "Somewhere safe." They took the egg into a room with thick stone walls and a heavy oak door, far from prying eyes. Only Tormund, Jon, and a handful of the most trusted men stood around the crude wooden table upon which it was set. The fireplace in the corner flickered, illuminating the egg-scaled shell, creating a dance of shadows across the walls. Ghost sat by Jon's feet, gaze pinned on the egg as though trying to unravel its secret. Tormund crossed his arms, leaning forward with his broad shoulders hunched. "Well?" he asked. "Is it real? Did you see one of these before?" Jon exhaled, the weight of memory pressing against his chest. "I have. Daenerys. She showed me dragon eggs once. Hers were turned to stone, or so the world believed, until she birthed her dragons in the fire. But they had a certain quality about them, a presence. This one feels the same, but how it came to be at the base of a glacier is a mystery." Tormund's men shifted uneasily. One of them, a wiry man named Fen, spoke in a quiet voice. "We heard whispers in the wind inside that cavern. Something eerie. The runes on the walls, they seemed to speak of an ancient magic. We dared not linger there long." Jon searched Tormund's face, seeing the seriousness there. The wildling was not normally prone to flights of fancy. His bravery was matched only by his brashness, yet clearly something had unnerved him in that frozen crypt. "Tell me everything," Jon said gently, gesturing for Tormund to share the details of their findings. Tormund nodded. "We'd been following stories of a new passageway beyond the shattered wall. Hunting rumors, really. They said there were tunnels hidden beneath a glacier, carved by underground rivers. The free folk who had ventured that way told tales of strange shapes in the ice, shapes that looked like people standing with spears in hand. None?" He paused, scratching at his thick beard. "We found one such tunnel, deep and dark. Spent 2 days walking along an icy corridor that never seemed to end. Then the tunnel opened into a vast chamber, white-blue with the reflection of the ice overhead, and in the center stood this pedestal. Looked like it had been carved by no human hand. The walls around it were etched with symbols I couldn't read, but they were definitely not giant or children of the forest symbols. Couldn't make heads or tails of it. And in the center of that pedestal sat this egg." "No, well." Jon's gaze rested on the dark shell. It was eerily silent in the small room, as though everyone were holding their breath. "This is dangerous," Jon finally said. "A dragon egg in the north. If it truly is what we think, then it changes everything." Tormund blew out a breath. "You think it might hatch?" Jon did not answer immediately. His silence seemed to lengthen. He remembered the stories Daenerys had told him of the pyre, of how dragon eggs needed tremendous heat and a sacrifice of blood and magic to awaken them from their stone slumber. He also remembered that hers had responded to her Targaryen blood, responded to something in her lineage. He glanced around at the men gathered, measuring their expressions. Uncertainty, fear, and a glimmer of excitement. "We should keep it hidden," he said at last. "No one in the south must hear of this. Word of another dragon egg would spark trouble we can't afford." Tormund nodded. Trouble indeed. But if I'm honest, Jon Snow, part of me wonders if that trouble might be necessary. If a dragon can be born here in the north, maybe it's a sign. The long night might be over, but winter isn't. And something about that cavern. I have a feeling we haven't seen the last of its mysteries. Now, Jon cast a long, measured look at Tormund. "We'll handle this carefully. For now, you and your men should get some rest. I'll post guards outside this door. No one should enter without my leave." Tormund grumbled about wanting a good ale before bed, and then he and his company took their leave. Jon stayed behind, staring at the egg, sensing an undercurrent of power within it. He thought of Daenerys, of dragons, of the Targaryen heritage that coursed through his veins. Though he had tried to distance himself from that part of his identity, he could not deny the truth of his bloodline. A swirl of questions and possibilities churned in his mind, refusing to settle. Eventually, he extinguished the torches in the room, save for one near the door, and stepped out into the corridor. The men he posted outside were loyal Northerners who knew how to hold a secret. They nodded solemnly as John closed the door behind him. He moved through the passageways of Winterfell, each echo of his boots on the stone reminding him of how alone he truly felt in shouldering this new burden. Ghost padded silently at his side. The dire wolf occasionally bumped Joan's hip with his broad head, a quiet gesture of comfort or encouragement. John wasn't sure which. He found Sam in the library later that night, sifting through old tomes and scrolls by the light of a single flickering candle. Sam looked up, blinking in surprise to see John approach. "John," he exclaimed, fumbling to mark his place in a leathery old book. "I was just going over some genealogical records. Did you need?" John closed the library door behind him. This was not a conversation for even the faintest of eavesdroppers. He pulled a chair close to Sam's table, noticing the piles of parchment scattered about. "I need your help," John said quietly, and the tone of his voice instantly alerted Sam that something serious was at hand. Sam's eyes widened. He reached up to remove his reading spectacles. "Of course, anything." John drew a deep breath. "Tormund brought something back from beyond the wall. An egg. A dragon egg. A real one from what I can tell. It's not a fossil. It has warmth. I've felt it." The color drained from Sam's face. A dragon egg? In the far north? He shuffled through the stacks of books nervously. "But that can't be." "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without further proof. I've seen Daenerys dragon eggs before. This one feels alive." Sam inhaled sharply, eyes darting between the columns of texts, as though searching his mind for references to lost Targaryen lore. "This is unprecedented," he murmured. "But then many things are these days." He cleared his throat. "What do you need from me?" John's voice dropped lower. "I need to know if there's any lore about a dragon egg left in the north. Any mention in the old texts, hidden scraps in the library that talk about Targaryens traveling beyond the wall, or perhaps the children of the forest having some hand in it. I need to know if there's a way to keep it from hatching, or if it's even wise to do so. Sam's brow furrowed. He looked both excited and deeply worried. "I'll search, but it may take time. So many records were lost when King's Landing fell, and the Citadel's archives remain scattered. Still, there could be something among the Stark family records or in the older volumes about the Age of Heroes. Magic was more prevalent in those times." John nodded. "Thank you, Sam. Keep this between us. Nobody else knows about it except Tormund and the few men who found it." Sam placed a comforting hand on John's shoulder. "Of course. I'll do what I can." Then his voice took on a slightly hopeful note. "John, if this egg is real, you might have the blood needed to—" John cut him off. "I won't dwell on that, not yet. Too many horrors have come from the Targaryen bloodline, and too many wonders as well. But we can't rush to conclusions. Let's just find out what we're dealing with." They parted ways, with Sam's candlelight flickering on the curved shelves of ancient knowledge as John returned to his chambers. Sleep did not come easily. His dreams were filled with visions of a great black dragon soaring over the snowy fields of the north, its roar echoing in the freezing air as an army of shadows crept across the horizon. He saw Daenerys's face, pale and resolute, and then he saw the egg in a cradle of flames, throbbing like a heartbeat. When he awoke, sweat soaked his collar despite the chill in the room. The next day, the pale winter sun brought no warmth. John passed the hours in a tension-filled haze. He attended to his duties in the courtyard, oversaw the rotation of guards, visited the common halls to ensure food supplies would outlast the season. Everywhere he walked, he felt the weight of the secret pressing against him, a quiet burn in his chest that was strangely akin to anticipation. Ghost followed, never straying far, the direwolf's presence a reminder of the primal bond between them. By evening, John found himself back in the private room with the egg. A single torch lit the space. He drew closer to the egg, observing its dark gleam, running his hand over the warm ridges carefully. It still radiated that gentle heat, as though it held a living fire within. Now and again he thought he sensed a pulse, like a faint, distant heartbeat. For a moment, he almost imagined it resonating with his own, though perhaps that was just his thoughts running wild. He recalled the stories Daenerys had told of her dragons hatching in the funeral pyre, how she had stepped into the flames unburned. That was a singular, extraordinary moment, linked not just to Targaryen blood, but to the unique circumstances of that night. Blood magic, prophecy, and the dying embers of the comet overhead. No such omens danced in the sky now. Yet, as he ran his fingers over the egg, Jon couldn't shake the notion that something was stirring. He didn't know if it was the egg or himself. Days passed, and the hush around Winterfell deepened. The nights stretched longer. The darkness seemed to set in earlier each day. Tormund and his men remained in the castle, occasionally questioned in hushed tones about their journey, but always with Jon's warning to remain silent. Sam spent hours each day poring over scrolls. He found a few cryptic references to the Frostbound Serpent in an ancient text, but nothing conclusive. He discovered old tales of dragons that once roamed the skies over Westeros in centuries past. Rumors that one might have ventured northward, never to be seen again. Yet no text confirmed the existence of an egg hidden beneath a glacier. Late one evening, Sam came to Jon's solar with a slim manuscript, his face pale and excited. He set it down on a narrow table and pointed to a passage in High Valyrian. "It mentions a lost clutch of eggs," Sam explained, words tumbling out. "It speaks of Balerion the Black Dread, that he might have sired more than the known hatchlings. One passage describes a rumor that one of these eggs was stolen during the reign of King Jaehaerys I. It disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Some speculated it was spirited away far beyond the king's lands. But the record stops abruptly. Then why? Jon studied the ornate script, not comprehending the High Valyrian without Sam's help. "That's all? A rumor?" Sam nodded, his eyes flicking over the lines. "Yes, only a rumor. The scribe ends by saying the egg was never recovered. Others believed it was destroyed, but it's the only hint I've found that suggests there might be another egg out there, unaccounted for." Jon closed the manuscript carefully, a strange sense of resolution settling over him. The puzzle pieces were aligning, if only in his mind. A lost Targaryen egg, stolen centuries ago, hidden away in a place where no one would think to look. The far north, a land hostile to most life. Perhaps it had been sealed in ice for hundreds of years, sustained by old magic, waiting for... what, exactly? The flicker of the hearth danced across Sam's face. "What do we do now?" he asked. "If this is truly a Targaryen egg, I'm not certain leaving it in the cold is wise. But heating it might. You remember what Daenerys did. Fire and blood. That's how her dragons hatched. Do you believe we should?" "Never rain." Jon stared at the embers, feeling the weight of that question. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "The last time a dragon was born into the world, kingdoms were toppled. The dragons changed everything. People feared them, worshipped them, and war followed." Sam was silent. Then he said gently, "If there's any chance the egg could hatch on its own, ignoring it might be more dangerous." Jon rose from his seat. The tension in his shoulders throbbed. "I'll think on it. We can't act rashly. There's no immediate threat, not like before. The White Walkers are gone. The realm is at peace. Or what passes for peace in these times. Next one even." Sam clasped Jon's arm in a reassuring gesture. "Take your time," he said, though Jon wondered how much time they truly had. In the days that followed, Jon wrestled with the question of whether to keep the egg hidden away, or attempt to harness its power. A part of him, the part that believed in honor and duty, whispered that bringing another dragon into the world could yield chaos. Another part, a quieter voice, reminded him of the dangers that might be lurking. They had believed the long night was the end of all threats. But the world was vast, and the unknown was always waiting. Perhaps a dragon, bound to someone who understood the weight of leadership, could serve as a powerful guardian rather than a weapon of conquest. Tormund was restless. He would pace around the courtyard, his heavy boots leaving great footprints in the snow, occasionally pausing to ask Jon if any new decision had been made. Jon understood Tormund's impatience. The wildling had risked life and limb to bring the eggs safely to Winterfell. He wanted to see something come of it, some grand revelation or event. But Jon remained cautious, especially now that winter's grip on the land was tightening day by day. Often Jon visited the room where the egg was kept. The chamber was never truly warm, but the egg's presence seemed to generate a heat that pushed back against the chill. Each time he laid a hand on its surface, he felt that steady pulse again, as if a living creature slumbered within, gathering strength. He remembered the first time he touched the flank of Rhaegal, the green dragon that Daenerys had allowed him to ride, how the beast's scales had trembled with life beneath his palm. This egg had a similar vitality, dormant but not extinguished. One late afternoon, as he was leaving the chamber, Jon found Arya waiting outside the door, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. He froze, a momentary panic gripping him. Arya had been away for some time, traveling across Westeros to the far corners, and she had only recently returned to Winterfell. Her gray eyes flicked to the thick door, then to Jon's face. Her expression was unreadable, but Jon knew her too well to believe she was merely passing by. She tilted her head. "What's in there?" Jon hesitated, measuring how much to reveal. Arya was family, truly, if not by blood then by the bond they shared growing up. If there was anyone he could trust besides Sam, it was Arya. But the question remained. Was it wise to burden her with this secret? "I can't say," he replied softly. Arya pushed off from the wall and stepped closer. "You know I can tell when you're lying, Jon." She studied him, her gaze sharp. "You've been slipping in and out of that room at all hours. There are guards posted outside it who refuse to let me in. Tormund and his men are lurking about like caged beasts. And Sam looks as though he's discovered some dire secret in those old books. All of this points to something bigger than you just storing extra furs." Jon exhaled slowly. "Arya," he began, trying to keep his voice calm. "This is a matter of great importance, but not one I can share lightly." She eyed him with a hint of mischief in her smile. "You've changed, Jon Snow. A few years ago you would have trusted me without hesitation." He shook his head. "It's not about trust. It's about safety and knowledge. The fewer who know, the better." She glanced at the door again. "It's not something dangerous, is it?" Jon felt a weight behind his ribs. "It could be, but it isn't yet." Arya nodded once, her expression softening. "I won't pry. But if you need my help, I'm here." She reached out and squeezed his hand, an unspoken promise lingering in her eyes. Then she turned and made her way down the corridor, leaving Jon standing there with his heart torn between relief and regret. He hated keeping secrets from her, but he also understood how delicate this situation was. That evening, a strange heaviness filled the air. Snow drifted steadily from an iron-gray sky. The wind moaned through the ramparts, setting every shutter and door rattling as though Winterfell itself were unsettled. Jon could feel a prickling sensation at the back of his neck, a faint sense that something was about to change. Despite having faced the armies of the dead, he still felt unease in that quiet threat the North sometimes carried, that hush before a storm, or before some ancient power awakened. He stood with Ghost by the courtyard, surveying the fortress. The noise of clanging pots drifted from the kitchens, men huddled in cloaks by the gates. Everywhere, life continued in its routine. Nights were spent in front of the hearth, singing songs, whispering tales, trying to keep the cold at bay. But behind it all, Jon sensed the swirling tension of secrets. He knew that if the truth slipped out, everything could shift in an instant. Later, he went to the hidden chamber again. The guard stepped aside for him. A single torch lit the room, casting wild shadows across the walls. The egg sat on the table as always, a silent presence that drew his gaze the moment he entered. He approached it, and this time he did not simply rest a hand on its surface. He let his fingers trace each scale, feeling the subtle variations in texture, sensing the life beneath the hardened shell. In that moment, he felt a strange, wordless tug. It was not a voice. It was more like an instinct, a pull from deep in his blood. The fire inside him, the Targaryen heritage he had never fully embraced, seemed to rise to meet the egg's silent call. His heart hammered, and warmth flooded through his veins despite the cold air. He caught his breath, stepping back. He felt almost dizzy, as though he had tapped into something primal and vast. Was the egg responding to him? Had it recognized the Targaryen blood that he barely acknowledged? The possibilities tumbled through his mind, colliding with logic and fear. He turned away, pressing a hand to his temple, trying to steady himself. This was exactly what he had worried about. That blood carried obligations, carried power, and that power could be both miraculous and terrible. When he finally left the room, he found Sam waiting in the corridor, breathing hard as if he'd just run there. "John," he managed, pushing a sheaf of papers into Joan's hands. "I found a passage. A mention about the hatching of eggs in a cold climate. It's possible, though extremely rare, and typically involves some form of magical catalyst." "In a pain." Joan's pulse quickened. "What sort of catalyst?" Sam flipped through the papers, pointing to a line of scrawled text. "It's something to do with an exchange. Heat for cold, life for life." It's not fully clear, but it suggests that if an egg were to hatch in a place as cold as the north, it would require both a potent source of fire and, well, someone to guide it with the right bloodline. John remembered the dream of Daenerys stepping into the pyre. He thought of the flames that had once licked at her skin without burning it. He was not as she was. He had Targaryen blood, but he had never been immune to fire, never been called the Unburnt. He had scars from burns like any man. Sam saw the conflict in John's eyes. He swallowed nervously. "It doesn't necessarily say you have to. Well, do what Daenerys did. But it implies a ritual of some sort. Perhaps an invocation of the dragon's spirit." He hesitated. "We need more time. I'm still searching." John ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. "We have to be absolutely certain of what we're doing. If the egg hatches, we must be prepared to care for it, to raise it. The North is no place for a newborn dragon. Not unless we're able to create the conditions it needs to survive." Sam nodded. "I'll keep looking. But the library is only so big, and many of the texts that might help are scattered across the realm." John could not contain the swirl of emotions in his chest: excitement, fear, awe. "Keep me informed, Sam." The days stretched into weeks. Whispers circulated among the few who knew. Tormund and his men became restless, pressing John to make a decision about the egg. Sam redoubled his research efforts. Arya continued to watch John with a knowing gaze, though she did not confront him again about the locked room. Meanwhile, the snows deepened, and Winterfell's courtyards became a landscape of white drifts that sparkled under the faint winter sun. At night, John still dreamed of dragons. Each dream was slightly different. Sometimes he soared above the clouds on black wings, looking down at a frozen continent. Other times, he stood in a field of ice, the egg glowing with inner fire at his feet. He heard whispers in those dreams, voices speaking a language he could almost understand. Once he thought he heard Daenerys' voice, soft yet distant, as though carried on the wind from some far-off place. He'd awaken with his heart pounding, unsure whether these were premonitions or illusions conjured by his own mind. Ghost, for his part, was attuned to John's disquiet. The direwolf hovered around the locked chamber, ears perked, as though drawn by the same subtle power that emanated from the egg. More than once, guards reported hearing a faint rumbling sound from within, like distant thunder. Each time, they opened the door to find only the egg and the flickering torch. Nothing amiss aside from that lingering sense of a presence. One afternoon, as John made his way to the Great Hall, he was stopped by one of his scouts, a young man named Roderick, who had recently returned from a sweep of the nearby roads. "Lord Snow," Roderick said hesitantly, "there's word that riders from the south are heading this way." John's chest tightened. "How many?" "About a dozen, from what I could gather. They carry a banner, though I couldn't make it out from a distance." "Nan won't see." John's mind raced. He had no direct reason to suspect the egg's secret had leaked, but he had learned never to discount the possibility. Information had ways of traveling, especially rumors of dragons. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's meet them at the gates when they arrive. Keep an eye out." and alert the men that we host these southerners as guests, but remain vigilant." Roderick bowed, then hurried off. John continued to the great hall. On any other day, news of visitors from the south wouldn't trouble him so deeply. But now, with the egg resting behind a locked door and a swirl of uneasy questions surrounding it, the prospect of visitors felt fraught with potential danger. Could they be envoys from King's Landing, or travelers seeking trade? Or had they come because of rumors about another dragon? Hours later, just before dusk, the riders arrived at Winterfell's gates. John greeted them personally with Tormund and a few northern lords at his side. The wind hissed through the courtyard as the visitors dismounted, their cloaks heavy with frost. One among them stepped forward. A slender woman with keen eyes and a serious air of authority. She announced herself as Lady Aurelia of House Rar, some minor house from the Crownlands, if John recalled correctly. Her traveling companions appeared to be knights, each wearing plate covered by thick cloaks. No obvious threat, but John had long learned that appearances could be deceiving. "Welcome to Winterfell," he said, his words polite, if not overly warm. "I hope your journey was not too difficult." Lady Aurelia dipped her head. "We thank you for your hospitality, Lord Snow." She glanced around the courtyard, taking in the sight of Tormund's wildling leathers and the stern faces of the northern men. "We bring tidings from the south, mostly concerning trade routes and the deepening winter. We'd hoped to petition you for assistance in clearing some of the roads that have become impassable due to heavy snowfall." John forced a calm expression. "We can discuss this inside. My men will see to your horses. Please, follow me." They made their way through the corridors, the torches sputtering in the draft. The visitors cast curious looks at the stark surroundings of Winterfell, the high vaulted ceilings, the ancient banners swaying in the cold air. John led them to a modest receiving room near the great hall, where a fire had been lit to chase away the chill. He invited Lady Aurelia and her closest advisors to sit around a carved wooden table where mulled wine was served. As they spoke about the roads and trade, John kept a cautious watch on her every word, every glance. So far, she seemed genuine about needing northern help to keep the supply lines open. Yet, there was a tension in her posture that made John uneasy. She looked around too often, her gaze lingering on the more guarded sections of the castle. He couldn't be certain if it was merely curiosity about the fabled north or something else. Eventually, he ended the meeting politely, promising to hear more details on the morrow, once they'd all rested. Tormund eyed the southerners with open suspicion, as if waiting for them to drop their courtesy and reveal some malicious intent. But for now, nothing untoward happened. Servants led the guests to their rooms. John stood in the corridor, letting out a silent breath of relief as they departed. He and Tormund exchanged a look. The big wildling grunted. "Don't trust them," he muttered. John shook his head. "I don't trust anyone right now, but we have no proof they know anything about the egg." Tormund's eyes flicked to the locked chamber. "Let's hope they don't." John parted ways with Tormund and headed back to the egg's chamber, uneasy thoughts churning in his mind. If word had indeed traveled that a new dragon egg was hidden in Winterfell, even in the form of whispered rumor, it would draw all manner of opportunists, lords, and would-be conquerors. The world was not kind when it came to power. Dragons were the ultimate power, and everyone would either want to destroy it or possess it. He paused before the thick oak door, nodding to the two guards stationed there. They stepped aside. Inside, the torchlight illuminated the egg's dark surface, reflecting dully off the scales. John approached, his boots echoing on the stone floor, and placed his hand gently on the shell once more. The warmth met his palm. He closed his eyes and breathed, feeling again that faint sense of a heartbeat resonating with his own. It struck him then just how precarious this situation was. He thought about duty, his duty to the north, to protect his people. He thought about the weight of the Targaryen name he had never asked for. But perhaps destiny, or fate, or the old gods, he wasn't sure who to blame, had placed this egg here for a reason. For good or ill, it was in his hands now. The knowledge both frightened and fascinated him. He stood there in the hush, feeling the subtle pulse through his fingertips, as if the egg were calling to him in the silence. Outside, the wind howled, sending a draft through the cracks in the stone. But within that room it felt as though the air shimmered with possibility. He allowed himself a moment's wonder. Beyond the gloom of winter, past the hardships that had shaped his life, he sensed something stirring. Like a new dawn breaking over an endless night, it brought with it both a promise and a threat. A dragon in the north. Slowly he pulled his hand away and let the torchlight play across the glimmering scales. Whatever was to happen next, he knew he could not run from it. The future of this dragon, and perhaps the north, would depend on what he did in the coming days. And in the faint echo of that heartbeat, Jon Snow sensed that his own choices would guide the course of history yet again, as the North bore witness to the potential awakening of fire amid the ice. Jon stood in the quiet corridor for a long while, the echoes of the outside wind weaving through his thoughts. The knowledge that a contingent from the south had arrived weighed heavily on him. He could almost feel their curiosity scraping against Winterfell's walls, as though the very stones were listening for secrets. A fleeting doubt whispered in his mind. Could it be that they already suspected the existence of the dragon egg? Or was he overestimating the situation? He could not say. But caution had served him well in the past, and he would not abandon it now. He stepped away from the door and strode along the passage, passing through patches of torchlight and shadow. Each sputtering torch gave a brief burst of warmth before he was plunged into the cold darkness of the next stretch of hall. His breath formed faint wisps in the air. While Winterfell was never truly balmy, the deeper winter months turned the castle into a fortress of chill. He felt every inch of it now, from the stone beneath his boots to the cold that gnawed at the back of his neck. His destination was the smaller council room adjacent to the Great Hall, where he had asked Tormund, Sam, and a few select northerners to gather. When he entered, conversation halted. A low fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing light onto the faces of those assembled. Tormund stood near the flame, arms folded over his broad chest, his hair and beard still frosted with snow. Sam sat at a long wooden table, poring over a small pile of parchment. One of the northern lords, Glover by name, hovered in the corner with a doubtful expression. They all turned to face Jon. He closed the door behind him carefully, shutting out the curious ears of any passing servants. Then he approached, nodding to each man in acknowledgement. "Thank you for coming," he said in a tone just above a whisper. "I know we have more pressing issues, preparing for the worst of winter, ensuring our stores are sufficient, but these southern visitors may pose a threat we can't ignore." Tormund grunted. "Or they're just a bunch of travelers looking for a warm bed and some trade deals. We could be jumping at shadows." "That's true," Jon admitted, "but we must remain on guard. If rumors of the egg reached King's Landing, or any of the great houses, they'd send spies, or even soldiers, under the guise of peaceful intentions. They'd want to confirm what they'd heard." "Now," Sam pushed his parchment aside, adjusting his spectacles. "From what I gathered, Lady Aurelia said very little of any personal interest in the north beyond trade. But I did notice her eyes wandering. She seemed particularly keen on the locked wings of Winterfell, as if she found them more intriguing than the storerooms or guest quarters." Lord Glover nodded. "When we parted ways for the evening, she asked me about some of the older sections of the castle. Wanted to know if there were hidden passages. I told her a bit. Nothing that matters. Just that Winterfell's lower levels are labyrinthine and not well mapped." "Desien." Jon felt a tug of unease in his gut. "We should increase the guard presence quietly. Don't draw attention but post extra men in those corridors. I don't want any uninvited inspections." Tormund was frowning, his gaze flicking to the fireplace. "What's the plan if they do find out, Snow?" Jon's jaw tightened. "If they discover the egg, we'll be forced to decide whether to reveal the truth or conceal it more forcefully. But that depends on them." He took a moment, letting the crackle of the fire fill the silence. "For now, we wait and watch." Sam cleared his throat. "And what of the egg itself, Jon? Have you decided whether to take the next step?" He spoke the words delicately, as though afraid to voice them too loudly, lest the walls themselves carry the sound. Jon's gaze flicked toward the door, making sure it was closed securely. "I've been thinking about it more than anything else. Part of me believes we should keep it dormant, hidden. The world has seen enough war. Another dragon. It could bring about a new age of conflict. He paused, feeling the tension coil in his shoulders. But we also live in a realm where surprises lurk in every dark corner. If something worse than the White Walkers ever rose, or if the realm faced a threat we can't yet imagine, a dragon would be an asset. Tormund let out a low chuckle that held no mirth. You're not wrong. I've seen what dragons can do on the battlefield. Impressive, yes, but terrifying as well. Lord Glover exchanged a concerned glance with Sam. If Winterfell becomes home to a dragon, it will change the North forever. People might fear us, or they might flock to us, seeking the protection of a dragon. It would upend all the alliances we've built. Jon nodded. All true. That's why I haven't rushed to a decision. But I fear the egg may not wait on our timetable. Sam mentioned the possibility of it hatching on its own under the right conditions. If it's reacting to the presence of Targaryen blood. His voice trailed off. The memory of feeling that subtle pulse beneath his fingertips still sent a shiver through him. The sense of life contained within. The faint echo of something primordial answering to his bloodline. He had never wanted to be defined by his parentage, but the realm cared nothing for his personal wishes. Blood was power, and power was something the realm demanded. Sam frowned thoughtfully. I'll continue to research, but as I said before, many texts that might help us are out of reach. The Citadel's libraries are scattered, and King's Landing's archives were thinned by conflict. The only thorough records of dragon lore left in the Seven Kingdoms might be in private collections, and we'd have to send ravens to lords who might not keep our secret. And Jon laid a hand on Sam's shoulder, gratitude and exhaustion mixing in his expression. Do what you can with what we have, and if we can't find the answers we need in books, we may have to rely on instinct. He drew a breath, then addressed all of them. For now, our priority is to ensure these southern visitors don't sniff out anything unusual. Keep your ears open. If you see them wandering in places they shouldn't be, alert me or Tormund immediately. Now and the men agreed, exchanging grim looks, before drifting into scattered conversation. Tormund grabbed a flagon of ale from a side table and gulped it down with a muttered remark about the cold. Lord Glover tapped his fingers on the arm of a chair, already planning how to discreetly reposition guards. Sam meticulously collected his parchments, scanning them one last time, as if expecting to find some new revelation in the same old words. Jon merely stood there, arms crossed, letting the warmth of the fire bathe his face. Eventually, he dismissed them, and they filtered out into the corridors. Jon lingered by the hearth, lost in thought, until the room was empty except for Ghost, who padded in silently and curled up by the fireplace. The direwolf's red eyes glowed in the flickering light, fixed on Jon as though urging him to find a solution. Jon couldn't help but marvel at Ghost's steadfast presence, a reminder of simpler days when his greatest worry was surviving the chill at the wall and earning the respect of his knights' watch brothers. He knelt by Ghost, running a hand through the direwolf's thick fur. The old bond between them had only deepened through all their trials. Ghost let out a gentle rumble, pressing his head into Jon's palm. Outside the narrow window, the night sky was starless, blanketed by low clouds that promised more snow. He gazed at that opaque darkness for a time, letting his thoughts drift. Then he rose, deciding that sleep, fitful though it might be, would help clear his mind for the next day's challenges. Morning arrived with a veil of swirling snowflakes. The courtyard was half buried in fresh drifts, forcing the stable hands and serving boys to shovel paths from one tower to another. Jon woke early, descending to the hall where a modest breakfast of porridge and strong tea awaited. He ate quietly, exchanging only brief words with a few men on patrol duty. Outside, the world was subdued by the hush of the snow, but inside his mind, the question of the dragon egg roared with urgency. Before long, a servant informed him that Lady Aurelia and her companions were already stirring. They had requested an audience to continue discussions on the trade routes. Jon agreed to meet them in the great hall. He took his seat at the head of the long table, mindful of the ancestral Stark seat that seemed to loom behind him. Even though he was not a Stark by blood, the North saw him as one of their own. and that brought with it a responsibility he could not cast aside. Lady Aurelia entered with measured steps, her cloak dusted with snow. She dipped her head politely, and her knights formed a half-circle behind her. One of them was tall and broad-shouldered, with a vigilant air that put John on edge. He returned their polite greetings, bidding them sit. Tormund was present too, though he opted to stand off to the side. Arms crossed, his keen gaze observing every movement. They delved into the practicalities of clearing the roads. Lady Aurelia spoke of caravans stranded by snowfall, of towns running low on grain. She appealed to Winterfell for wagons, laborers, or even gold to pay for necessary provisions. All the while, John could see the calculation behind her eyes. Though her requests seemed genuine, winter was harsh on all corners of the realm. There was an air of quiet probing in her words. She glanced around the great hall, took stock of the men present, measured the emptiness of the space. From time to time, her gaze flicked to Tormund, whose wildling attire made for a stark contrast against the more polished northern guards. John gave measured answers, promising to see what resources could be spared. They spoke of distant villages, of river crossings turned to ice, of the difficulties in transporting goods from the Crown lands to the north. The discussion stretched on, and Lady Aurelia's questions grew more pointed. How many men does Winterfell have garrisoned? What are the major supply routes we might rely upon? Is the fortress well provisioned for a siege if roads were cut off? John recognized these as typical questions any traveling noble might pose, especially if they worried about the state of alliances. Yet it also seemed she was taking a keen interest in the castle's defensive capabilities. He answered only what was necessary, making sure not to reveal the full strength or disposition of Winterfell's forces. Tormund eventually broke into the conversation with a barking laugh when Lady Aurelia asked about hidden passages. Why? You planning to break in somewhere? Manin. Her lips curved in a brief smile, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of discomfort. Simply curiosity. Winterfell is legendary for its crypts and its tunnels. I've heard stories of the hot springs that run beneath the foundations, keeping some of the walls warm. Tormund shrugged. I'm sure you'll find your quarters plenty warm if that's your concern. Lady Aurelia allowed a polite laugh. Of course. My men and I are quite comfortable. She then turned her attention back to John. We appreciate your hospitality. I hope we can count on Winterfell's assistance as we navigate this winter. Nastin. John offered a measured nod. You'll have what help we can give within reason. The North is still recovering from the wars. Our people have endured much, and our priorities remain their safety and survival. She accepted this answer graciously enough, and they eventually drew the meeting to a close. John dismissed his men, inviting Lady Aurelia to remain as a guest in Winterfell while they organized the relief. The tall knight at her side seemed reluctant to leave, his eyes hovering on John a moment longer than was customary, before he followed his lady out. As soon as they were gone, Tormund ambled over, snorting under his breath. Something about them puts me on edge, that big knight especially. He watches every detail. Could be they're just worried about the winter, but I don't trust it. John stared after the Southerners' retreating forms. I don't either. We'll keep them close. Let's assign 2 of our men to accompany them if they wish to explore the castle grounds. Make it seem like hospitality. Messenger. Tormund flashed a wolfish grin. Hospitality with a watchful eye. Suits me fine. John left the hall, already thinking of what might happen if the visitors managed to slip away from their escorts. He thought of the locked room that contained the egg, and whether its occupant, silent and warm, might stir if someone of a lesser intention placed a hand upon it. The notion sent an uncomfortable chill through him, and he resolved to visit the egg soon, if only to reassure himself that it remained undisturbed. He made his way through Winterfell's winding corridors. The hush of old stone surrounded him, broken only by the muffled scuffle of his boots. Now and again, a torch would flicker, reminding him of the living warmth just beyond those flames. When he reached the guarded door, the 2 men on duty straightened. One of them announced that all had been quiet. John nodded, pushing the heavy door open. Inside, the egg sat on its wooden table, a single torch lighting the chamber with a warm, flickering glow. This time, as John approached the egg, a surprising realization settled over him. It felt slightly warmer than before, enough that he noticed the difference even standing a few feet away. Could it be the mere result of an extra torch? He stepped closer and placed a palm on the scales. The pulsing heat answered him, almost like a quiet heartbeat echoing against his skin. He shut his eyes, letting that sensation flow into him. It was as though the egg recognized him, or recognized the blood that ran through his veins. He could not recall Daenerys's dragons in infancy, but he did remember how the living creatures had radiated a fierce heat once grown. The egg's warmth was subtler, but it stirred a memory nonetheless. When he pulled his hand away, he saw a slight shimmer in the torchlight, as if the scales had taken on a faint glimmer. Perhaps it was merely a trick of his eyes, or perhaps it was something more. He turned to examine the room. They had positioned a brazier near one wall to keep the chamber from becoming too cold, but it was nowhere near the raging fires Daenerys had used. Still, the combined warmth of the torch and brazier might be enough to slowly coax the egg from its dormancy. John felt both dread and a curious excitement. The egg was alive, of that he was certain. He stood there for a while, letting the quiet seep into him. Ghost waited outside, so the only sounds were his own steady breathing and the faint popping of the torch. His thoughts drifted to the day Daenerys' dragons had first taken flight, to the awe and terror that sight had inspired. For better or worse, that moment had changed the course of his life, and of Westeros forever. Now, the potential for a new dragon lay here in Winterfell. The North, once a place of purely harsh winters and direwolves, might soon host a creature born of fire. Reluctantly, he tore himself away from the egg, ensuring the door was locked again behind him. Outside, he paused to speak quietly with the guards. If anyone attempts to enter, anyone at all, without my express permission, detain them. Do not hesitate. The guards nodded solemnly. John left them with a final glance, then ventured deeper into the castle, hoping to find Sam or Arya. He wanted to share this development, to gather more advice. At length, he found Arya in the archery yard, clad in a thick cloak, loosing arrows at a target half buried in snow. She was alone, her breaths visible in the frigid air. A line of arrows protruded from the target with impressive accuracy. John approached carefully, not wanting to disturb her focus. She must have sensed him though, because she loosed one final arrow, which thudded into the bullseye with a satisfying thwack, then turned. Her gray eyes studied him, a hint of concern flickering there. "You look troubled," she observed. He managed a tight smile. "I often do these days." They stood together in the near silence of the yard, the snow muffling all sounds, except their voices. Arya glanced around to ensure no one lurked within earshot. "Your southern visitors? Any trouble?" "Not yet," John answered, watching the swirl of snow catch the tip of one of Arya's arrows. "But I fear they have an agenda. Perhaps it's just curiosity about the North, or maybe they've heard rumors." Arya narrowed her eyes. "Rumors of the egg?" When John gave a slow nod, she sighed. "When were you going to tell me exactly what's behind that locked door?" Her tone was not accusatory, just weary. "I know something is happening, John." He weighed his words, but Arya was the last person he wanted to shut out. In the end, the bond they shared outweighed his caution. "It's a dragon egg," he said quietly. "One Tormund found beyond the wall. A real one." Arya didn't mask her surprise. She lowered her voice further. "Gods, a dragon egg in the North, and alive?" He nodded. "Alive, or very close to it. Sam has done some reading. It seems there's a chance it could hatch if certain conditions are met. I've been watching over it." "No." Arya's expression hardened into thoughtful lines. She stepped closer, forcing John to meet her gaze. "You worry the Southerners might be here for it?" "It's possible. Dragons make powerful allies and enemies. If they suspect it exists, they might try to seize it or expose it. Either one would be catastrophic, and I'm not sure I want the egg to hatch. The realm has seen enough bloodshed." Arya exhaled softly, her breath fogging around them. "Dragons are powerful, but I understand your hesitation. Think of the chaos it could cause. On the other hand," she trailed off, letting the words hang in the air. "I've thought about it," John said. "If war ever came again, a dragon could be the deciding factor between victory or defeat. But at what cost? These creatures don't just vanish when the war is done. They grow, they eat, they impose their presence on the world." Arya nodded, looking at the quiver by her side. "I trust you to make the right call. Just know that if the egg is in Winterfell, it's a Stark matter too, by blood or not." She paused, studying him with the intensity of someone who had seen the darkest corners of the earth. "But you're the one with Targaryen blood. Maybe the egg answers to you." Those words felt like a weight pressing on his shoulders. He gave a slight shrug, unsure how to respond. Arya picked up another arrow and fiddled with the fletching. "Well," she continued, her voice measured, "if you need me to keep an eye on Lady Aurelia and her knights, I can do that. I can be discreet." "Then, John offered a faint smile, appreciating her willingness to help. "Thank you. Any information you gather might be crucial." Arya turned and swiftly loosed the arrow at the target, hitting near the center once more. Then she slung the bow over her shoulder. "I'll see what I can learn." She walked past him, footsteps soundless in the snow, leaving behind the faint imprint of footprints that the wind would soon erase. John lingered there, the cold stinging his cheeks, each breath crystallizing in the sharp winter air. There was something comforting about the hush of the archery yard, about the swirl of snow that masked every misgiving beneath a veneer of pristine white. Yet no matter how silent the surroundings, the concerns in his mind raged like a storm. He contemplated the unstoppable forces that converged whenever dragons were involved. Destiny, magic, the raw ambition of men. Sooner or later, these forces would collide with the fragile peace he'd fought so hard to preserve. He spent the afternoon overseeing various tasks around Winterfell, doing his best to appear as though nothing unusual gripped him. He spoke with the stewards about food supplies, checked on the blacksmith's progress in forging new arrowheads, and visited the Ravenry to send out letters regarding the promised help for Lady Aurelia's region. Quietly, he instructed the stablemaster to prepare a few reliable horses in case they needed to dispatch messengers quickly. Meanwhile, he tried to keep an eye on the southern guests. More than once, he caught a glimpse of Lady Aurelia's tall knight wandering the courtyard, his gaze sweeping across the ramparts, with an air that suggested he was memorizing every detail. On another occasion, John spied Lady Aurelia herself near the library, speaking in low tones with two of her attendants. When she noticed John watching from across the corridor, she offered a cordial nod and resumed her conversation. He nodded back, careful not to show suspicion, but inwardly, he wondered what her real motives were. That evening, Sam requested a private meeting in his small office, tucked away on the second floor of Winterfell's keep. John navigated the winding stairs until he found himself at Sam's door, which was slightly ajar. He stepped inside to find Sam hunched over a narrow writing desk, candlelight dancing on the frayed edges of countless scrolls. Books stacked precariously on either side threatened to collapse if nudged. Sam looked up, rubbing the bridge of his nose wearily. "John," he said by way of greeting, "thank you for coming. I've been going through some of the older Stark records, bits of family lore that might intersect with Targaryen histories." John shut the door behind him, leaning against it. "Did you find anything useful?" Sam flipped through a yellowed parchment. "I'm not entirely sure. There's mention of an old rumor that during the reign of King Aegon III, one of his advisors attempted to hide a dragon egg in the north after the Dance of the Dragons nearly wiped out all the beasts. Something about ensuring the survival of the species if King's Landing fell. It's just a rumor, scribbled by a scribe centuries ago." "No." John raised an eyebrow. "So it might be the same egg Tormund found?" Sam shrugged. "Or another egg entirely, or a pure fabrication. These records aren't exactly precise. But it does point to a pattern. Targaryen loyalists occasionally tried to safeguard eggs in remote corners of the realm. The north would be as remote as one could get, at least from the perspective of southern lords." "Banan." John let out a low hum of understanding. "If that's true, it means this egg might have been in the north longer than Wood imagined." Sam nodded. "Quite possibly. The question remains, why now?" Why would it be stirred from its hiding place beneath that glacier? Did Tormund's men trigger something? Or is the presence of your Targaryen blood in the north acting as a catalyst? No. That question struck Jon deeply. He sank into a stool near the door, letting the tension settle in his shoulders. I don't know, Sam. All I know is that the egg is waking up. I can feel it. Each time I touch it, the heat is stronger. Sam searched Jon's face carefully. And do you want it to hatch? The directness of his question caught Jon off guard. Jon opened his mouth, but no easy answer came. At last he sighed. I honestly don't know. Part of me sees the destruction Daenerys dragons wrought. The other part knows how desperately we relied on that power to fight the White Walkers. If another threat ever emerges, we might need that power again. But to willfully bring a dragon into this world, especially in the north, it could breed fear, chaos, war. Sam set the scroll aside, looking thoughtful. Every choice we make carries a risk. Perhaps the best we can do is prepare ourselves and ensure that, if a dragon does come to life here, it's under your guidance and not in the hands of someone with darker intentions. Now, Jon recalled how Rhaegal had accepted him, how he had soared above the earth on the dragon's back, feeling the rush of wind and the pounding of a reptilian heart beneath him. He understood how that bond could form, how it could shift the balance of power in a heartbeat. I can't let it fall into the wrong hands, he said quietly. That much is certain. Sam fiddled with a quill, tapping it against the desk. I'll keep searching for any clues on how to control the hatching process, or how to halt it if you decide to. But we have only so many texts. Jon rose, placing a hand on Sam's shoulder. Your help means more than I can say. Thank you, Sam. He then moved toward the door, pausing before leaving. And keep a lookout for Lady Aurelia's people near the library. She seems too inquisitive for my liking. Sam managed a tight smile. I will. Good night, Jon. Outside the door, the corridor stretched into dim lamplit gloom. Jon felt his exhaustion pulling at him, but a sense of duty drove him to do one more round of the castle before retiring. He checked in with the guards near the egg's chamber, found them alert. He walked by the guest quarters, heard muffled voices from behind Lady Aurelia's door, but could discern no clear words. He peered through a slit window overlooking the courtyard, where a few braziers lit the swirling snowfall. All was still, yet he sensed the undercurrent of tension in the very stones of Winterfell. When finally he returned to his own chamber, the fire in the hearth was banked low. Ghost lay curled on the rug, lifting his head when Jon entered. The direwolf's ears pricked, as though asking if everything was well. Jon stooped to ruffle Ghost fur. Still here, old friend, he murmured. The direwolf's eyes glowed in the faint firelight. Jon unbuckled his sword belt, setting it aside, and sank onto the edge of his bed. He let his mind wander, anticipating the next day's negotiations with Lady Aurelia. The prospect of hidden motives, the secret presence of the egg throbbing with life beneath the castle stones. Would he be forced to confront the possibility of hatching it soon? Would it happen on its own if the subtle warmth continued to grow? The uncertainties pressed in around him. His dreams that night were a tumultuous swirl of fire and ice. He found himself once again standing on a snowy plain, a dragon egg balanced in his palms. The sky above was split between a crimson dawn and a starless night. He heard the distant roar of a dragon, deep and resonant, but no shape appeared in the sky. Then the egg in his hands grew unbearably hot, forcing him to drop it into the snow, where it sizzled and sent up plumes of steam. He tried to reach for it, but the heat was too intense. A rush of wind whipped across the plain, carrying ashen snow, and for a moment he thought he saw Daenerys' silhouette. When he called out her name, she turned to him with sorrowful eyes, and then the vision dissolved, plunging him into blackness. He awoke with his heart pounding. The embers in the hearth had nearly died, and the thin gray light of dawn slipped through the narrow window. Ghost stood by the door, ears perked. Jon rose, breathing heavily, blinking away the remnants of the dream. The taste of ash lingered in his throat, and he went to the window to inhale the icy air. Beyond the towers of Winterfell, the sky was pale, and new snow draped the courtyard in a pristine blanket. The dream felt too real, too pointed, as if his own subconscious were warning him of what might come to pass should the egg find its flame. He dressed methodically, layering tunics and breeches for warmth, strapping on his sword belt. By the time he exited his chamber, the castle was stirring. Servants hurried about, lighting fresh fires and carrying trays of bread and porridge to the great hall. Snow filtered in whenever a door opened, dusting the stone floors. Ghost trailed at his heels, silent as a shade. John decided to slip into the library to check on Sam. He found him still at his desk, eyes bleary as though he'd barely slept. The thick smell of candle wax hung in the air. Sam started when John stepped inside. "Oh, John, good morning," he said, rubbing his eyes. "You haven't slept?" John asked gently. "A few hours, perhaps," Sam replied. "I was looking for references to cold weather hatching. I found a single line in a dusty account by Maester Elizarian. Something about a captive dragon's egg in the north that never hatched. It was kept in some fortress, half forgotten. But that's hardly encouraging, is it?" John circled around the table, glancing at the text. Maybe the conditions weren't right. Or maybe it was a different kind of egg. He gave Sam a small, apologetic smile. "Don't burn yourself out on this. We can only do so much." "I know." Sam closed the book, fatigue etched into every line of his face. "I know. Still, I feel like we're racing an unknown clock. We don't know if we have weeks, months, or days before something changes with that egg." John placed a hand on Sam's shoulder. "Get some rest, Sam. That's an order." Then, with a brief farewell, he left, leaving Sam to tidy his scrolls. The corridors were growing busier now, and John thought it best to keep a public presence. He headed to the great hall, where some of the northern lords had already begun their morning meal. Lady Aurelia was also there, seated at a side table with her retinue. She wore a traveling cloak the color of deep wine, her hair pinned up to reveal a pale face. She met John's gaze with a polite smile, gesturing for him to join her. He approached, noting that Tormund was seated at a nearby bench, devouring a plate of bread and salted pork. The big man offered John a brief nod. Lady Aurelia's knight stood behind her chair, ever vigilant. John inclined his head to Lady Aurelia. "Good morning. And to you, Lord Snow," she replied in a smooth voice. "I trust you slept well?" John managed a non-committal smile. "As well as one can in winter. I hope your accommodations are to your liking?" She assured him they were. Then, after a few courtesies, she steered the conversation toward the reason for her presence once more. The trade routes, the supply lines, the need for aid. John gave measured answers, conscious of Tormund's presence and the watchful glances of the hall's other occupants. Lady Aurelia seemed genuinely concerned about her lands, describing how snowfall had blocked entire roads, how villagers were on the brink of starvation. Yet there was an undercurrent to her words, a searching tone that made John wonder if her sincerity was a cloak for something else. She finished her meal and spoke quietly. "I was thinking of touring Winterfell's battlements later. The architecture here is remarkable, and the hot springs beneath the castle must be quite a sight. Would you care to join me? A guide of the fortress might offer me insight into its design. Someday, my people may need to replicate such fortifications if the winters worsen." John's immediate instinct was wariness. Giving her an extensive tour would expose many of Winterfell's lesser-known corridors. Yet refusing might arouse suspicion. "Of course," he said after a pause. "I'd be pleased to show you around. Shall we say an hour from now?" She agreed, flashing that polite smile again. John bowed his head in parting, then stepped away to confer with Tormund. The wildling had finished his food and was wiping his beard clean with a cloth that looked far too small for the job. "So you're going to show her around?" Tormund asked, clapping John on the shoulder. "Might be a chance to lead her away from the locked door, if you get me." John nodded. "Exactly. If she wants to see the hot springs, I'll guide her to the parts that are safe. Keep the men posted near the restricted areas, though. We can let her wander off." Tormund grinned. "I'll make sure of it." An hour later, John met Lady Aurelia in the courtyard. Snow drifted in lazy spirals, and a thin layer of ice rimed the stone steps. She wore fur-lined gloves and a hood, looking every bit the prepared traveler. Two of her knights accompanied her, along with one northern guard assigned as a courtesy escort. John greeted them and proceeded to lead the way toward the battlements. As they climbed the ancient steps, he felt Lady Aurelia's gaze on his back, as though she were observing more than just the castle walls. Reaching the top, they beheld a sweeping view of Winterfell's grounds and the surrounding snow-laden fields. The storm of the previous night had left everything pristine, a white expanse broken only by the dark silhouettes of leafless trees. Lady Aurelia appeared genuinely impressed, pausing to take in the sight. "Remarkable," she murmured. "The north is harsh, but it has its own stark beauty." John cast a sidelong glance at her. "It does," he agreed. "And it shapes the people who live here. Endurance is as necessary as warmth." She turned to him. "I've heard the stories of your battles, Lord Snow. Some say you led a force against the armies of the dead itself, that you've seen the end of the world and lived to speak of it. Others say you rided wildlings and northerners alike." John shrugged off the weight of those tales. "Exaggerations, perhaps. We fought, we survived, that's all." She smiled. "History will remember it differently." They walked on, tracing the curve of the walls. John pointed out some of the older towers, the ones partially rebuilt after the wars. He explained how the hot springs beneath Winterfell funneled warmth through channels in the walls, preventing them from freezing solid. They descended again, and he led her through a corridor that skirted the main courtyard, carefully avoiding the wing where the dragon egg was hidden. All the while, her knights made quiet conversation with the northern guard, but they too seemed to be watching every doorway they passed, every sconce and tapestry. Eventually, Lady Aurelia asked, "Would it be possible to see the lower levels where the springs flow?" John stiffened inwardly. Though he kept his expression neutral, the lower levels can be treacherous, and some areas are in disrepair. "I'm afraid not all sections are safe for visitors." She tilted her head, a hint of regret touching her features. "I see. Perhaps if we had more time." She let the sentence trail, as though leaving the door open. John said nothing, only guided her down another corridor leading to the main courtyard. When they stepped outside, the gusting wind lifted the edges of her cloak. She looked around, silent for a few beats, then returned her attention to John. "Thank you for the tour, Lord Snow. Winterfell is indeed as formidable as the stories claim." She gave a polite bow of her head, then her knights followed suit. "If you'll excuse me, I have letters to dispatch. We must keep my home informed of our progress here." "Now and see." John inclined his head. "Of course, if you need anything further, you have only to ask." She departed with her retinue. John watched them cross the courtyard, footsteps crunching in the fresh snow. Then he felt a presence behind him, and turned to find Arya stepping from the shadow of an archway. She tilted her head, watching Lady Aurelia as well. "She asks a lot of questions," Arya commented softly. John exhaled. "Too many." Arya nodded. "I'll see what her knights have to say when they're in their cups tonight. Sometimes men let their guard down over ale." "Yeah." John gave a slight, grateful smile. "Good." They stood side by side for a moment, the wind ruffling their cloaks. In that quiet, snow-draped courtyard, the heart of Winterfell beat strong, as it always had. But beneath that surface, secrets coiled. An egg pulsing with hidden fire, the possibility of southern intrigue, and the legacy of ancient magic that refused to die. The hush of winter was deep, but even in the silence, the next storm was brewing. John turned to Arya. "Be careful. If Lady Aurelia's intentions are darker than they appear, she won't hesitate to protect her secrets." "Montour." Arya's lips curved in a small, fierce grin, the same one that spoke of countless challenges survived and foes bested. "Neither will I, John. Neither will I." They parted ways, and John headed toward the nearest guard post. He needed to coordinate the watch, ensure that no corners of Winterfell would be left unguarded. As he walked, he felt again the quiet resonance of the egg in his thoughts. It was as though the creature within it was calling out, its faint heartbeat echoing with each step he took on the cold, ancient stones. Inside him, conflicting hopes and fears vied for dominance. He had seen enough tragedy to last a lifetime, had yearned for peace more than anything. Yet destiny, it seemed, had placed another dragon's fate in his hands. Whether he chose to awaken that fire or keep it forever banked, he knew one truth above all others: decisions of such magnitude always carried a cost, and he would pay it in full before this was done. India, Tendemfall. The day wore on under a pale, colorless sky. An icy breeze stirred through the courtyard, carrying flurries of snow that dusted every surface. By midday the temperature seemed to drop further, as though the very heart of winter had settled upon Winterfell with renewed vigor. Jon patrolled the battlements, checking in with guards, nodding to men he recognized, and offering a word or two of encouragement to those who were younger or new to the North's punishing cold. The tension that came from harboring a secret, a dragon egg, lay coiled within him, but he forced himself to maintain a calm, resolute demeanor for all to see. Far below, in the courtyard, Lady Aurelia's knights mingled with some of the castle's guards and servants. They seemed to share light banter, but Jon watched their body language from above. The tall knight with the intense stare stood apart, examining the architecture in silence. Jon wondered if that man was the real threat, the quiet observer who collected details like a spider in its web. He quietly vowed to keep an extra eye on that one. A swirl of movement below caught his attention. Arya had just entered the courtyard, crossing paths with the knights. They did not seem to notice her more than in passing. She barely glanced at them, adopting that quick, fluid step of hers that could be as unobtrusive as a shadow when she wished. Jon waited to see if any exchange would occur, but none did. Arya continued on, disappearing into an archway that led to the kitchens. Satisfied that she was going about her plan to gather intel, Jon resumed his circuit of the walls. When he finally descended back into the courtyard, Tormund was waiting at the base of the steps, frowning at a stack of supplies that had just arrived from a northern village. Flour sacks and salted fish lay on a sled, half covered by a tarp. Some of Winterfell's men were unloading them under Tormund's watchful eye. At the sight of Jon, Tormund waved him over. "These are the supplies from last hearth," Tormund said, tapping a boot against one of the crates. "Word has it the roads are almost impassable past the shivering wood. Another day of snowfall, and we won't be able to move wagons down that route." "Madual?" Jon nodded, gripping the edge of the sled. The wood was rimed with ice. "Lady Aurelia's not the only one who'll need help. Our own people will struggle if we can't keep trade routes open." Tormund offered a gruff laugh. "You can't feed the entire North single-handedly, but I know you'll try." Then he lowered his voice. "Our knights are poking around." The big one asked one of our men about the lower levels. He said he'd heard Winterfell had hot water for baths, wanted to see it for himself. "Just an excuse if you ask me." "Then." Jon's eyes narrowed slightly. "We'll keep the same plan, let them see what we choose to show, nothing more." Tormund nodded. "Aye. Meanwhile, I'll set some of my own folk to keep a watch at the library and near that locked corridor. We can't take chances." Jon glanced at the tall knight, who was now in conversation with two stable hands. The man's posture suggested polite interest, but Jon noticed the way his gaze flicked toward the towers. "I agree. Keep me informed." He clapped Tormund on the shoulder, then made for the great hall, where warmth beckoned from within. In the entryway, a pair of servants hurried past with trays of bread, cheese, and steaming stew. The hall itself smelled of roasted carrots and onions, a comforting aroma that momentarily eased Jon's thoughts. He took a seat at a side table, not wanting to draw too much attention by occupying the high seat. A few men and women dined nearby, discussing the weather and speculating on how long the freeze might last. One older man with a grizzled beard swore he'd seen winters worse than this, and claimed this one was only just beginning. Arya appeared, slipping into a seat opposite Jon with the quiet grace that always unsettled those unused to her stealth. Jon nodded a greeting. "Hungry?" She shrugged, taking a piece of bread from a passing tray. "A bit. More interested in what I might learn." Jon leaned in slightly, keeping his voice low. "Did you overhear anything from Lady Aurelia's retinue?" Arya tore off a bit of bread and chewed thoughtfully. "They're cautious. One of them mentioned the rumor that Winterfell is full of hidden vaults and crypts. Another asked about the wars you fought, specifically how Daenerys Targaryen used dragons." She paused. "I think they suspect something, but they don't know exactly what." They might guess you have a dragon, or they might just be fishing for any advantage. Either way, they're searching. John let out a slow breath, steadying himself. If they press too hard, they'll show their hand. We'll be ready. Just remain vigilant. Arya nodded. The conversation fell silent for a moment, as a servant came by, offering them both ale. Arya shook her head while John accepted a small cup. He sipped, feeling the mild sting of the drink warm his throat. Beyond the crackling of the fire in the hearth, the hall was mostly subdued, the talk low and cautious. It reminded him that tension, like a wolf, prowled the edges of Winterfell, never fully gone. When they finished, Arya rose. I'll keep at it. Let me know if you need me to guide them away from anything particular. Otherwise, I'll keep my ears open. John thanked her. Once she left, he lingered for a time, listening to the soft hum of voices, letting the fire's glow soak into him. He rehearsed a plan in his head. If Lady Aurelia or any of her knights tried to break into that locked chamber, he would have the advantage. The men he'd assigned were trustworthy, and he would personally handle any confrontation. Despite telling himself this, a knot of unease refused to loosen in his chest. Before the afternoon light faded entirely, he excused himself and made his way to Sam's cramped office. He found Sam dozing with his head resting on an open tome. A guttering candle threatened to burn out. John gently shook Sam's shoulder, and the maester jolted awake, nearly knocking over an inkpot. "John," Sam mumbled, blinking rapidly. "I was just resting my eyes." John gave a faint smile. "You need more than that." Sam rubbed at his face, then coughed to clear his throat. "I found no further clues about halting an egg's hatching. But I did reread the accounts of how Daenerys' eggs hatched. The combination of extreme heat, dragonfire, in essence, along with some measure of blood magic. It was a unique event. Without that, it's possible the egg would remain dormant, or it might simply respond to the presence of Targaryen blood in a lesser way, gradually warming over time. "Nine." John leaned against the desk, careful not to disturb the stacks of parchment. "The egg grows warmer every day, Sam. It's subtle, but I can feel it." Sam's eyes widened in concern. "And if it hatches without a grand ritual? It might be smaller or weaker than Daenerys dragons were at birth. But it would still be a living dragon, dependent on you or someone else to care for it. And it would need warmth, much more than Winterfell's winter can provide." John thought of the forges in the castle smithy, the braziers lining the halls, the subterranean hot springs. None of that matched the blazing intensity of a funeral pyre. Yet if the egg was stirring, it might be enough to coax out the creature inside. If it does hatch, I'll have to find a way to keep it alive. That means feeding it, sheltering it from the cold, and keeping it hidden from the entire realm. Sam exhaled, the worry in his eyes profound. "That sounds nearly impossible. But if anyone could manage, it's you, John." Demo murmur. He did not feel as confident as Sam sounded. He placed a hand on Sam's shoulder. "Rest properly. I need your mind sharp." Sam nodded gratefully, then rubbed his temples. "Before you go, I'll remind you. The older texts suggest a deep connection between the dragon and the one who wakes it. A bond beyond mere ownership. If that egg hatches under your watch, it could imprint on you. That's a powerful connection, but it comes with responsibility and risk." John let those words sink in. He thanked Sam and left, heading back through the corridors with steady purpose. Outside, snow still fell in a swirling dance, blanketing the castle in a hush that felt almost mournful. He glanced at the old stone towers, the stained glass windows that caught what little light was left. Winterfell seemed caught in a timeless stasis, as though waiting for the next move in a game none of them wanted to play. He decided to check on the egg once more. The guards at the door nodded him through. Inside, the chamber was dim, lit by a single torch on the wall. John crossed to the table where the egg lay. That now familiar warmth radiated, a pulse that seemed to greet him. He placed his hand on the shell, feeling a deeper heat than before. It was faint but undeniable, as if an ember had been fanned from within. For a moment, he closed his eyes. In his mind's eye, he saw swirling flames, a fleeting silhouette of a dragon's wing, and the echo of a roar from far away in time. He opened his eyes, breath shallow. If the egg was truly responding to him, then the choice might not remain his much longer. He feared a day would come when the shell cracked of its own accord, and the creature inside would make its presence known to the world. The notion both thrilled and terrified him. A dragon in the north, an echo of House Targaryens, might nestled amid the snows of Stark lands. He withdrew his hand and quietly left the chamber, locking it behind him. Outside, he gave the guards a curt nod, then continued down the corridor. Ghost awaited him near a narrow window, staring out at the darkening sky. The direwolf turned as Jon approached, tail giving a mild wag in greeting. Jon patted Ghost's flank. "Should we see if Lady Aurelia is still about?" The direwolf huffed gently, as though in answer. They took a winding path toward the guest quarters. Midway, Jon heard hushed voices coming from an alcove near a shuttered window. He paused, signaling Ghost to remain still. He recognized one of the voices, the tall knight. Keeping his steps soft, Jon moved closer until he could make out the words. The knight spoke with barely restrained impatience. "Our time grows short. The lady's attempts to glean information haven't yielded much. We know there's some hidden door, but no one will tell us what lies beyond." "Then?" Another voice, quieter, responded. "Should we press harder? Perhaps an attempt at night while they sleep?" The tall knight's tone was cold. "Too risky. Lord Snow has watchers everywhere. If we fail, we'll lose all chance. We need proof, not suspicion." Jon's heart thudded. Proof of the egg. They might not know exactly what was hidden, but they strongly suspected something of value, something that the North guarded fiercely. He stepped back, easing away before the voices could carry on. Ghost followed, silent as ever, and they slipped down an adjacent hallway, vanishing before either of the knights could notice. Jon's mind raced as he returned to his solar, inwardly cursing the precarious position they were in. Lady Aurelia and her men were on the verge of trying something desperate, and the presence of extra guards might not dissuade them forever. He needed a strategy, perhaps a misdirection. Yet how to arrange one? He remained cloistered in his solar, pacing slowly before the low-burning fire as shadows stretched across the stone walls. Eventually, he summoned Tormund and two of his most trusted northerners to discuss the next move. They gathered by the fireplace, exchanging wary glances. Jon explained the fragments he'd overheard, choosing his words carefully. "They're planning to discover what we're hiding. If they act at night, they might try to slip into that corridor or bribe a guard." One of the northerners, a man named Martin, spoke up in a steady voice. "We can double the guards, my lord. Search them if they're out of their chambers at odd hours." Jon shook his head, eyes focused on the flames. "That might tip our hand. If we act too obviously, they'll sense we're hiding something truly significant, and that might drive them to more dangerous measures. We need to appear calm, let them think we suspect nothing, but remain ready." Tormund tapped his foot impatiently on the floor. "What if we set a trap, Snow? Let them think they've found something important in some storeroom, while the egg stays safe behind locked doors. We can feed them false leads." Jon considered the suggestion. "That might work if we can stage it convincingly. A trunk labeled with Targaryen sigils, placed somewhere they can stumble upon it perhaps. But they might question why we'd leave such a trunk poorly guarded." "Meter shall say." Tormund grunted a laugh. "We'll guard it, but not too well. Just enough to make it look real. When they try to break in, we catch them red-handed." Martin nodded. "We could add a bit of old dragon-related paraphernalia inside. Some old scale from King's Landing if we have any. Something to make them believe they've uncovered a secret. Then we confront them as thieves, and they'll have no reason to suspect the real treasure lies elsewhere." Well, Jon reflected on this plan. It was risky, but it might buy them time. He turned to Tormund. "Gather what you can find. Old relics, any scraps that might hint at dragons but won't give away the truth. Put them in a small chest and store it in an older section of the castle. Station one or two guards there. Instruct them to keep watch but feign laziness if anyone approaches. I'll ensure the corridor with the egg remains heavily guarded behind the scenes." Tormund's grin widened. "Leave it to me, Snow." The meeting ended shortly thereafter. each man departing with a renewed sense of purpose. John lingered, letting the embers of the fire play over his thoughts. He prayed the deception would be enough to throw Lady Aurelia and her knights off the trail. But he also recognized that if they were truly cunning, they might see through it. They needed luck on their side, and perhaps the quiet cooperation of Winterfell's ancient stones. Night fell with a deeper chill than before. The air outside seemed to crystallize with every breath. Snow piled against the outer walls, forming drifts that reached the knees of the patrolling guards. Clouds obscured the moon, casting the courtyard into near-total darkness. The only light came from torches guttering in the wind, and the faint glow from windows high in the towers. John posted himself near the corridor that led to the eggs chamber. Though he stayed out of direct view, he concealed himself in a shallow recess, Ghost lying at his feet. 2 guards stood at the corridor's entrance, stifling yawns, but keeping their eyes open for anything suspicious. Hours slipped by, the hush of winter sealing them in. A few times, the guards shifted, stamping their feet to ward off the cold. Once, the door at the far end of the hall creaked open, but it was only a servant hurrying past to fetch more firewood. No one else stirred. Meanwhile, Tormund had positioned his small trap in an older wing of Winterfell, a place rumored to contain the remains of a collapsed tower. Inside a dusty storeroom, an unmarked trunk now sat, containing scraps of old Valyrian steel chain links, useless fragments, and a broken dragon-themed sigil once owned by a maester who studied Targaryen history. Nearby, Tormund had placed 2 guards, who were instructed to half-heartedly chase away anyone who lingered, but not to do it too convincingly. The hope was that someone would investigate. Near midnight, John decided to make a quiet round of the castle, leaving the corridor to one of his men. As he passed through the great hall, he found it nearly empty, with only a few servants clearing away the remains of the evening meal. Most of Lady Aurelia's group had retired early, though a few knights could still be lurking about. John's boots echoed on the flagstones, the tap-tap of footsteps amplified by the silence. He stepped outside into the courtyard, pulling his cloak tighter. The cold bit into his face, and his breath crystallized immediately. Ghost followed closely, leaving faint paw prints in the snow. Over by the gate, a lone torch flickered, manned by a guard who recognized John with a nod. John gave him a brief greeting and continued, scanning the shadowy corners. All appeared still. He hoped Tormund's plan was bearing fruit somewhere else in the castle. He rounded the corner of a tower and spotted movement near a side entrance. 2 figures stood there, speaking in hushed tones. He ducked behind a snow-laden cart, gesturing for Ghost to remain low. As he peered out, he recognized Lady Aurelia by her cloak. The other figure was her tall knight, though his hood was drawn up, obscuring most of his face. John could make out snatches of their conversation. "Almost certain it's something to do with the Targaryens," Lady Aurelia was saying. "He's too secretive. The old rumor about Jon Snow's parentage. It must be true." The tall knight leaned in. "If he has a dragon or an egg, we must lay claim to it for the crown. We have the king's blessings to root out any threats to the realm." She hissed a warning. "Speak softly. We can't confirm that yet. If we accuse him openly, we risk war with the North." The knight's reply was lost in the wind, but John had heard enough to confirm they knew, or strongly believed, the truth about his parentage, and suspected he might be hiding a dragon. That meant their next move would be more desperate. He backed away, keeping out of sight, and slipped through a side passage to avoid detection. Ghost padded after him, silent as a phantom. He made his way to Tormund's decoy location, passing through a corridor lit by only a single torch. The stones underfoot were cold, and the walls glistened with a thin sheen of moisture from the hot springs that threaded below. He found Tormund stationed near the storeroom door, arms crossed, a single guard on either side. John glanced around. Any sign of them? Tormund shook his head, grinning ruefully. "None yet. Maybe they're more cautious than we thought." John frowned, relaying the snippet of conversation he'd overheard. Tormund's grin faded. "They're thinking of the king's blessing? That means they could attempt to seize the egg on behalf of the crown. And if they've any proof of your Targaryen blood, they might claim you're a threat." "Men." John ran a hand through his hair. "Exactly. They wouldn't risk confronting the entire North directly, but they might try to smuggle the egg out or kill it if they believe it poses a risk to the throne. Either scenario is unacceptable. Tormund's features hardened, the merriment draining from his eyes. We won't let them. If they come sniffing around here, I'll handle them personally. They remained on alert. Time crawled. The corridor was eerily quiet. The only sound, the distant drip of water. Now and again, Tormund rubbed his hands together to keep warm, though the corridor's proximity to the hot springs made it marginally less frigid than the courtyard. Eventually, footsteps echoed. Jon and Tormund pressed themselves against the wall, signaling the guards to remain casual, as though unprepared. Flickering torchlight revealed two of Lady Aurelia's knights approaching. They paused at a bend, clearly uncertain which way to go. One muttered something inaudible, and the other shrugged. Slowly they advanced, reaching the guard post. "What's in there?" one asked, nodding toward the storeroom door. The guard feigned boredom. "Old junk. Nothing worth seeing." The knight tried to peer around him. "Then you won't mind if we take a look?" The guard shifted, making a half-hearted attempt at blocking the door. "Lord Snow said not to let any guests in without permission." The knights exchanged glances. One stepped closer, dropping his voice. "We just want to look around, friend. No harm done." He produced a small pouch that clinked with coin. The guard pretended to look tempted, glancing furtively around. Jon and Tormund stayed hidden, observing how this would unfold. At length, the guard stepped aside with a mumbled, "Don't blame me if you get in trouble." The knights pushed the door open, stepping inside. Tormund gave Jon a quick nod. They followed silently, the guards trailing behind. Inside, a single lantern illuminated the cramped space. Dust motes swirled in the air. The knights immediately spotted the trunk in the corner. One bent down, fiddling with the latch. The other drew a dagger from his belt, as if expecting a trap. Jon and Tormund stood still in the shadows, watching the men's every movement. A grunt of satisfaction came when the knight opened the trunk. He sifted through the contents, pulling out the old dragon's sigil with wide eyes. "Look at this," he whispered. "They have Targaryen relics." The other knight frowned at the broken chains. "It's old stuff, maybe worthless, but it confirms they're keeping something from us." He glanced around as though expecting to find more. Could there be an egg hidden here, or are these just decoys? At that moment, Tormund stepped forward, clearing his throat. The knights whirled, one brandishing the dagger. Tormund lifted his hands in a non-threatening gesture. "Easy there. Don't want any bloodshed. Just curious what you're doing rummaging through Winterfell's property in the dead of night." The knight with the dagger snarled. "We have the right." Jon emerged from the shadows, quiet fury in his eyes. "You have no rights here, unless I grant them." And I didn't. Both knights froze, recognizing Jon Doye. The one with the broken sigil in his hand tried to look defiant. "We mean no harm. We merely seek to confirm if any threat to the crown lies hidden. We act under the authority of—" Jon cut him off. "This is my land, and you're trespassing on private property. I told you. If you have concerns, bring them to me openly." Tormund stepped in front of the door, arms folded across his chest. The knights exchanged uneasy glances. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the taller of the two knights lifted his chin. "If you're hiding a Targaryen dragon, that is treason." Jon suppressed the cold jolt in his stomach. "Treason or rumor? All you've found are some old relics from past wars. People collect such things, maesters study them. It proves nothing." "And the knight opened his mouth to argue, but his companion put a hand on his arm. "We should go," he muttered. "We've learned all we can here." Jon's tone was ice. "Not before we settle this matter. You tried to bribe my guard. That's not how guests behave in the north." The second knight's jaw clenched. "We made an error in judgment. We'll answer for it if necessary." Jon's gaze flicked to Tormund, who clearly itched to do more than just talk. Jon hesitated. Arresting these men could trigger a diplomatic incident, especially if Lady Aurelia claimed they were her rightful protectors. Yet letting them go scot-free might embolden them to further attempts. He needed a middle ground. He straightened, letting the authority of Winterfell run through his voice. "I'll not lock you away if you promise to do no more sneaking around. If I catch you again, I'll drag you to the dungeons and let you freeze there. Are we clear?" Both knights cast furtive glances at each other, their expressions frustrated. At last, the taller one gave a stiff nod. "Understood." Jon moved aside. Tormund did the same, though his scowl never left his face. The knights edged out of the storeroom, returning to the corridor. The guard who had feigned bribe-taking gave them a contemptuous look. Once they were gone, Tormund let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "They'll run straight to their lady and tell her this was a setup. Or at the very least, they'll know we're onto them." Jon closed the trunk, stirring up a cloud of dust. "We didn't have a choice. This might scare them off from trying anything more brazen, at least for a while. But it confirms they suspect the truth. A Targaryen secret in the north. We must assume they'll double their efforts." "Misextemta." Tormund glowered, punching a wooden beam lightly. "Let them try. The egg's safe." Jon nodded, but a gnawing unease tugged at him. He recognized how precarious this had become. Lady Aurelia's knights could claim that he was withholding a dragon from the crown's knowledge. If they gathered any solid proof, it could put Winterfell at odds with the throne. And if the egg hatched, it would be impossible to hide a newborn dragon for long. The entire realm would clamor for control, or destruction, of the beast. They left the storeroom, instructing the guards to lock it up again. Tormund peeled off to ensure the corridor near the egg's chamber was still secure. Jon returned to the main keep, weaving through corridors that felt colder now than at the start of the night. Ghost padded beside him, ears perked, attuned to every subtle sound. Outside Lady Aurelia's quarters, 2 of her knights stood watch. Jon observed them from a distance. They conversed in low voices, presumably waiting for their errant companions to return. Jon wondered what they would report, how Lady Aurelia might react, and whether she would try to turn this into a diplomatic crisis. With a sigh, he withdrew, heading to his own chamber. He couldn't confront her directly until morning without appearing too aggressive. Even so, he placed a guard in the corridor beyond, instructing them to keep a record of who entered and exited. Once in his room, he found the fire had been stoked by the servants, and the space held a comfortable warmth. Ghost circled, then lay down near the hearth, eyes half-lidded. Jon shrugged off his cloak and loosened his sword belt, every muscle in his body taut with the tension of the night's events. He sank onto a wooden chair, leaning his elbows on his knees. The flicker of the flames cast dancing shadows across the floorboards. His mind drifted to the egg again. How much longer until it could no longer be disguised as a mere rumor? If Lady Aurelia had any sense, she would realize that Tormund's relics were a distraction. Would she push further, or would she cut her losses and return south to gather reinforcements? He let his eyes close, the day's fatigue pulling at him. The hush of the night settled in. In the distance, a lone horn sounded from the walls, signaling the change of the guard. Apart from that, Winterfell was silent. Jon's breathing slowed, and for a moment he hovered between waking and sleep. Images drifting through his mind, the swirling snows of the far north, an ancient cavern of ice, the dragon egg pulsing with heat, and Daenerys' face framed by flames. The dreamlike visions shifted to memories of the long night, of how the undead legion had been vanquished by fire and steel. He inhaled sharply, bringing himself back to the present. He rose from the chair, crossing the room to peer out the small window. From here, he could glimpse part of the courtyard, where a torch guttered in the wind. Snow fell steadily, a gentle veil draping the stone walls and ramparts. It all looked so peaceful, yet beneath that pristine surface lay undercurrents of conflict and possibility. If the egg hatched, would the dragon be a tool of protection or destruction? The question haunted him. At last, he let himself rest, lying fully dressed on his bed. Ghost settled at his feet, warm and reassuring. Jon drifted off, dreaming of flames that parted the snow with their roar, and a single winged shape rising into a twilight sky. When he awoke, gray dawn light seeped around the shutter. He sat up slowly, muscles aching from sleeping in his clothes. Ghost was already at the door, ears perked, nose to the gap beneath. John heard voices outside, two men speaking in urgent, hushed tones. Alarm flared in his gut. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and opened the door. A guard and one of the house staff stood there, each wearing worried expressions. The guard bowed his head quickly. "My lord, I was just about to knock. We've word that Lady Aurelia requests an immediate audience with you. She's in the great hall, waiting." John's brow furrowed. "At this hour?" The guard nodded. "She said it was most urgent." The house staff member chimed in. "She and her knights have already gathered. Looks like they mean business." John grabbed his cloak, belting his sword over his tunic. The staff member stepped back, letting him pass. Ghost followed, nails clicking on the stone floor. As John headed for the great hall, his mind raced. Why would Lady Aurelia call for him so early unless she intended to demand answers or reveal some ultimatum? Perhaps her men's midnight excursion had prompted a confrontation. When he entered the hall, he found it dimly lit by only a few torches. Outside, the stormy sky promised a dreary morning. Lady Aurelia stood near the long table, flanked by half a dozen knights. Her expression was grim, her posture rigid. Some of Winterfell's men stood to one side, uncertain whether to form a guard line or wait for Joan's lead. Sam hovered in the background, worry etched across his features. Arya was nowhere in sight, which both relieved and unsettled John. She might be watching from the shadows. He approached Lady Aurelia, voice calm. "You asked to see me?" She inclined her head in a stiff formal gesture. "I did. My knights have just informed me of an incident last night, in which they claim to have stumbled upon Targaryen relics, stored in a disused room. They also claim they were threatened with dungeons." "Banning?" John kept his face impassive. "They were caught trespassing. They bribed a guard to enter a private area. Those are not the actions of honored guests." She held his gaze. "There are loyal knights of the crown, entrusted with ensuring there is no threat to the realm hidden in Winterfell. If they believed you might harbor something dangerous..." John let a hint of steel enter his voice. "Then they should have come to me, as courtesy demands." A tense silence wrapped around them. Lady Aurelia's knights shifted uneasily. Ghost stood at Joan's side, silent and watchful. At length, Lady Aurelia lowered her gaze slightly, as though softening her stance. "This situation is regrettable. I do not condone my knights' actions entirely, yet I cannot dismiss their concerns. Word spreads that you have ties to House Targaryen, that you once aligned with Daenerys." John bristled inwardly, but tried to keep outward calm. "I fought alongside Daenerys to save the living from the dead, and that war is over." She studied him a moment, then exhaled. "Perhaps, but rumors persist of a dragon in the north. The crown would be uneasy if such a thing existed without its knowledge. I have a responsibility to ensure that any threat to the realm is addressed." "Maester." John measured his response carefully. "Winterfell does not threaten the crown. We have no intention of hosting any new dragon. Those relics you found are curiosities, nothing more." She nodded, but her eyes flickered with doubt. "Then permit me one more request. Allow my men and me a thorough search of Winterfell, guided by your own. If we find nothing, we'll have no reason to suspect you further. We can then depart with a clear conscience." "Elchire." John's pulse spiked. A thorough search risked exposing the egg if they delved too deep. He paused, and Lady Aurelia caught that hesitation, her expression sharpening. "Surely you have nothing to hide?" He glanced at Sam, who looked anxious. Tormund stood off to one side, scowling. The assembled knights waited, hands near their sword hilts. If he refused outright, it would confirm their suspicions. If he agreed, they might uncover the locked chamber. Either outcome spelled trouble. He forced a slow exhale, refusing to let them see his inner turmoil. Winterfell is vast, and winter is harsh. If you truly wish to comb every corner, you risk your men's safety in decaying passages. But if it puts an end to these unfounded rumors, it'll allow a limited search under supervision. You'll have to give me a day to prepare." Lady Aurelia studied him a moment longer, then dipped her head. That seems fair. Tomorrow morning then. We will conduct the search. John inclined his head gravely. Then with a terse word, dismissed them. She and her knights filed out, leaving a hollow quiet in the hall. Tormund walked over, spitting out a curse once the Southerners were gone. They want to poke around in every nook and cranny. We can't hold them off forever. Sam inched closer, trembling slightly. John, what will you do? Even if they don't find the egg, they might notice that one room is heavily guarded. They'll insist on looking. John gazed at the empty space where Lady Aurelia had stood. We have less than a day. We could move the egg somewhere they'll never think to check. Somewhere even more secure. No. Tormund's eyes lit with a fierce determination. We could slip it outside the walls for a time, bury it in the snow under guard until they're gone. John mulled that over. But the egg is warm. Bringing it into the extreme cold might jeopardize its health. Or it could attract attention if someone sees us moving it. Sam wrung his hands. What about the crypts? Some of the tombs are sealed. Or one of the deeper passages that lead closer to the hot springs. But if we hide it there, it might be even warmer. That could hasten hatching. John let out a breath. We're running out of options. The crypts might be best. Nobody but the Starks venture too deep, and most visitors find them unsettling. He hesitated, thinking of his own memories, of those silent crypts where the ancient kings of winter slumbered in stone. But Lady Aurelia's search might well include the crypts if she's thorough. Tormund scratched at his beard. If we can conceal the entrance or barricade it from within. Sam interjected softly. That might give away something. If the crypts appear intentionally blocked, they'll suspect a hidden treasure more than ever. Then, John paced, restless. Every plan had its flaws. But they had no choice. If the knights searched the castle and found the guarded chamber, the egg would be discovered. Perhaps the crypts, despite the risk, were still the lesser evil. He turned to Sam. Gather some men you trust. We'll move the egg tonight, after dark. Then we'll prepare the corridor so it looks unused. No guards, just locked. If Lady Aurelia asks, we'll say the door leads to collapsed storage. Sam nodded hesitantly. Tormund looked unconvinced. You're sure about this? John's jaw set. No. But we can't keep it where it is. We'll stash it in the deepest part of the crypts, in one of the sealed chambers beyond Father's tomb. I only hope the cold down there doesn't harm it, or the presence of the old magic doesn't stir it further. Tormund shrugged. Better than letting the Southerners find it. Let's do it quickly. They dispersed to make preparations. John climbed to the battlements, needing a moment's solitude to think. The wind cut sharply, and snow whipped around him, yet he barely felt the chill. He stared out at the expanse of white fields, imagining what it would look like if a dragon soared overhead. The realm had never seen a dragon in the north like this. Hatched in secrecy, bonded to a man who once knew himself only as a star. He wondered if destiny could be bargained with, or if all roads led to a single, fiery conclusion. Below in the courtyard, he spotted Sam gathering 2 guards. They entered a tower that led to the locked chamber, presumably to begin the process of carefully moving the egg. John's pulse quickened, nerves fraying. 1,000 things could go wrong. Someone might spot them, or the egg might react poorly to being disturbed. Yet, the alternative was far worse. He forced himself to descend and help. Inside the locked chamber, the egg gleamed in the low torchlight, each scale seeming to shimmer as though reflecting hidden embers. The guards gazed upon it with awe and a little fear. John strode forward, pressing his hand to the shell. It felt hotter than ever, the pulse stronger. Was it actively responding to the sense of urgency, or was that just his imagination? Sam approached tentatively, carrying a sturdy wooden chest lined with furs. We can place it here. It should keep it insulated and protect it from sudden cold. John exchanged glances with the guards. Be careful. If you drop it. One guard cleared his throat. We won't, my lord. Together, they lifted the egg, feeling its substantial weight. The faint warmth radiated through the heavy gloves they wore. John held his breath, half expecting the egg to shift or crack, but it remained whole, silent except for that intangible heartbeat. They laid it gently in the chest, packing extra furs around it to cushion any jostle. Then Sam closed the lid, and they latched it shut. Tormund arrived, nodding his approval at the chest. "Let's move. The longer we linger, the higher the chance of discovery." They navigated corridors and staircases with caution. One guard at the front, holding a torch, another at the rear. Jon carried one side of the chest with Tormund. Sam and the remaining guard held the other side. Ghost padded ahead, sniffing corners warily. Anyone seeing this procession might assume they were moving supplies, though the hour was late for such tasks. Yet the men wore determined expressions, and no one questioned them. Reaching the crypt entrance, they descended into the cold gloom. Torches revealed a winding staircase leading deep beneath Winterfell's foundations. The air grew still, thick with the dust of centuries. The men's breath plumed in the darkness, while moisture slicked the walls. Ghost paused at intervals, ears twitching, as though hearing distant echoes of the dead. At last they reached a lower level rarely visited by anyone but the Starks themselves. Rows of carved stone figures stood guard over ancient tombs, each statue bearing the likeness of a Stark from ages past. The flickering torchlight gave them a grim and watchful aspect. Jon could almost feel their eyes upon him, judging his choice, or perhaps silently urging him to protect the North at any cost. A small alcove lay beyond one of the older tombs, blocked by fallen rubble. Tormund set his torch aside and pried loose a slab of stone that had once sealed an interior chamber. The space beyond was cramped, dusty, and smelled faintly of old bones. "This should be hidden enough," Tormund said in a low voice. Jon nodded. "We'll place the chest here, then we'll use some of the rubble to conceal it further." He approached the newly revealed cavity, the flicker of his torch revealing walls that glistened with damp. The air was markedly cooler here, though not as freezing as the outer courtyard. Nearby, Sam set down his corner of the chest, panting slightly from the effort. They maneuvered the chest into the narrow space. Carefully, they arranged loose stones around it, leaving an opening for air to circulate. Then they covered their tracks as best they could, returning some of the fallen debris to its original position so it looked undisturbed. Jon placed a hand on the chest's lid for a final moment, half expecting the egg to give a jolt or a roar from within. It did not. The hush of the crypts enveloped them, broken only by the faint drip of water trickling down the stones. He whispered a soft vow, uncertain whom he was addressing. "Stay safe." Then he turned away, gesturing for the others to follow. One by one they filed back out, torches casting wavering shadows across the silent stone kings. By the time they reached the staircase, Ghost had already bounded up ahead, eager to leave the oppressive stillness behind. Jon looked back only once, gazing at the dark corridor leading deeper into the crypts. Then he ascended, feeling no lighter despite having left the egg behind. If anything, the weight on his heart was heavier than before. When they emerged into the ground-level corridors, the men exchanged looks of relief mixed with unease. Tormund clapped Jon on the back. "Well, that's done. Now we just have to hope Lady Aurelia doesn't fancy a jaunt into the bowels of the crypts." "Never." Sam cleared his throat nervously. "We should do our best to discourage her. Talk of curses, perhaps. Many are unnerved by tombs." Jon nodded, trying to muster some confidence. "We'll manage. For now, let's get some rest. Tomorrow will be interesting." They parted ways in weary silence. Jon trudged back to his chamber, passing a handful of servants who barely noticed the late-night gathering. The torchlight wavered, and the corridors seemed endless, each turn reminding him that Winterfell's secrets now felt more alive than ever. Somewhere deep below, the egg pulsed with quiet heat, hidden among the bones of the ancient Starks, waiting for its moment. He closed the door to his chamber, finding Ghost already there, curled by the hearth. The direwolf looked up, ears flicking, as though to ask if everything was well. Jon sank into his chair, resting his forehead in his hands. "We'll see," he murmured. After a moment he rose, fed the fire with another log, and lay down on the bed, not bothering to remove his boots. Weariness consumed him, drawing him under until he succumbed to an uneasy sleep. Dawn arrived with pale, cold light. Jon rose to find the castle in a flurry of activity, as if every servant and guard knew a day of reckoning approached. Lady Aurelia's search party would gather soon. He could already sense a mounting tension in the hallways, caught glimpses of her knights conferring in corners. He steeled himself, smoothing his cloak and checking that his sword was belted properly. In the courtyard, he found Lady Aurelia, her tall knight, and a handful of others readying themselves with torches, rope, and an air of determination. Tormund stood by, arms folded, a forced grin on his face. A handful of northern guards waited to guide the southerners. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation, as though the castle itself held its breath. Jon stepped forward, greeting Lady Aurelia with a nod. "You and your knights are prepared, I see. Shall we begin?" She assessed him with cool eyes. "We shall." They set off, starting their methodical tour of Winterfell's many corridors, storerooms, and cellars. Jon and Tormund led them first to the main storage areas, showing barrels of grain and salted meats. Lady Aurelia examined everything, polite but thorough. If she noticed the hidden tension in Jon's posture, she did not comment. Behind her, the tall knight scoured each room, eyes missing nothing. They continued this pattern, moving through the fortress in a systematic sweep. Each time, Lady Aurelia asked about a locked door. Jon either opened it or explained that it was sealed due to structural damage. They rummaged through old armories, dusty antechambers, and the half-collapsed tower destroyed during the wars. Everywhere they went, Tormund wore a mask of mild boredom, as though unimpressed by the entire affair. Near midday, they reached the corridor where the egg had originally been kept. Jon showed them the door, now unlocked and empty behind it. Cobwebs hung in the corners, and dust coated the stone floor. Lady Aurelia frowned, stepping inside, but found only blank walls and a handful of crates filled with decaying cloth. "You kept this locked?" she asked. "It was once used for valuables," Jon replied evenly. "We've since moved them. No use for such a room now." She studied him, then turned to the tall knight, who said nothing but wore a suspicious expression. After a brief inspection, they moved on. Jon suppressed a flicker of relief. The real test would come if they tried to delve deeper into areas that led to the crypts. After hours of searching, midday had passed, and they returned to the courtyard for a brief respite. Lady Aurelia's men looked weary, having scoured countless chambers with nothing to show for it. Tormund devoured a quick meal, smirking at them over a chunk of bread. But Lady Aurelia's eyes still gleamed with determination. She signaled to Jon, "You've shown us much of Winterfell, Lord Snow, but there's one place I would like to see. The Stark Crypts. Many rumors abound that secrets lie beneath. If you'll permit it, we'd like to look there as well." Jon felt his heart thud. He forced an air of casual reluctance. "The crypts are a sacred place where the fallen Stark lords rest. I don't make a habit of letting outsiders roam those halls. It's disrespectful to the dead." Lady Aurelia's gaze sharpened. "I understand your concern, but we must be thorough if we're to dispel all suspicion. We need only a look, then we'll be satisfied." He glanced at Tormund, who raised an eyebrow. Then Jon sighed, stepping forward. "Very well, but you'll find only old bones and statues." Without another word, he led them across the courtyard to the entrance of the crypts. A sense of dread gnawed at him with each step. If they decided to press into the lower levels, they might uncover the hidden alcove. His best hope was that the gloom and the fear of disturbing the dead would deter them from delving too deep. He took a torch from a bracket on the wall. The group descended the stone steps, their footprints echoing. The air grew heavy and stale, and the hush of centuries pressed down like a weight. Row upon row of Stark statues stood as silent sentinels, their stone direwolves at their feet. Lady Aurelia gazed upon them with cautious respect. The knights kept close, weapons at the ready as though expecting a specter to leap from the shadows. Jon led them along the main path, pointing out the more recent tombs, his father, Ned Stark, among them. The visitors murmured quietly, clearly unsettled by the atmosphere. Tormund maintained a stony silence, occasionally flashing a grin to the more nervous knights. As they reached the older tombs, Lady Aurelia paused, shining her torchlight into the darkness beyond. A faint draft stirred the dust. She glanced at Jon. "What lies further on?" Jon forced a dismissive shrug. "Ancient burials, sealed and rarely visited. It's dangerous, some sections have collapsed. We can turn back now, you've seen enough. She did not move, her suspicion lingering. Then a subtle tremor passed through one of her knights, who quickly spoke up. My lady, the air grows foul. We should heed Lord Snow's warning. Her lips parted, as though about to protest, but another knight coughed. Shivering in the clammy cold, the tension stretched, poised on a knife's edge. John waited, torn between relief and dread that she might insist on pressing forward. At length, Lady Aurelia sighed, nodding. Very well. Let us return to the surface. We have seen enough to quell any rumor. John suppressed a wave of relief so strong it nearly stole his breath. He inclined his head. Thank you for understanding. They retraced their steps, their torches casting distorted shadows against the vaulted ceiling. Once they reached the top of the stairs, daylight and fresh air greeted them. Lady Aurelia's knights exhaled in relief, rubbing their arms to warm themselves. John kept his composure, though he felt a surge of triumph. Their plan had worked, at least for now. Back in the courtyard, Lady Aurelia faced John. She wore a constrained smile. I will report to the crown that you harbor no dragons, no hidden threat. I trust we can lay this matter to rest. John inclined his head with careful politeness. I appreciate that. Winterfell is open to peaceful cooperation as always. She nodded curtly. We'll make arrangements to depart in the coming days. For now, I'll request my knights remain in our assigned quarters. No further wandering. They exchanged formal farewells. As Lady Aurelia and her retinue dispersed, Tormund let out a bark of laughter. Well done, Snow. Didn't even break a sweat. John exhaled, shoulders sagging slightly now that the danger had passed. We're not entirely safe yet. We need to keep the egg hidden until they're gone. And watch them carefully. She could still be plotting something. Tormund clapped him on the shoulder. We'll see it through. Then, maybe we can worry about whether that egg decides to hatch. John forced a smile, though it did not reach his eyes. He couldn't shake the sense that the crisis was only temporarily delayed. The egg remained in the crypts, warming slowly in its hidden alcove. Lady Aurelia might depart, but the world beyond would not remain ignorant forever. Sooner or later, the dragon within that shell would announce itself with flame and fury, unless John found a way to guide its destiny differently. He cast one last glance toward the crypt entrance, where the shadows lengthened beneath the arch. Within those ancient halls, the next chapter of the North story lay sleeping. He wondered if, in the hush of night, the old Stark kings stirred in their tombs, pondering the arrival of a dragon in their ancestral home. In that silence, he imagined he could almost hear the low thrum of a heartbeat that belonged to neither man nor beast alone, but to something straddling both worlds, the future stirring, awaiting its moment in the darkness below.